Hello, my name is Gideon, and I gave my life to building a home, raising my son, and keeping this family together. But at Sunday dinner, he looked me in the eye and called me a freeloader. Everyone laughed, no one defended me, they thought I was weak, invisible. What they didn't know was that I'd been keeping records, holding back proof, and planning my final move all along. Would you like to hear what happened when the truth finally came out? The smell of pot roast used to feel like home. Every Sunday since I retired, I'd show up at my son Thorne's house just before dinner. Same time, same knock on the door, same greeting, though even that had started to lose its warmth. Today the kids ran through the house like wild horses, the sound of their bare feet on hardwood echoing through the hall, the clatter, the laughter. It should have felt familiar, comforting, but something was off. "Hi, Grandpa," Ember beamed, rushing up and handing me a glass of water like a server at a restaurant. She always had that tender spark in her, even when the rest of the room dimmed around me. "Thanks, sweetheart," I murmured. Thorne didn't get up, didn't even lift his head fully. A quick glance from the couch and back to his phone. I made my way to the dining room, careful not to bump into anyone. The table was already set, plenty of food, plenty of people. But my chair had changed. It used to be the one at the head of the table. Now, it sat lonely at the far corner, next to the high chair and nearest to the kitchen door. Out of the way. I paused, staring at my old seat. My son-in-law had claimed it, laughing loudly at something I hadn't heard. No one noticed me hesitate. I slid into my new spot and watched from the sidelines of my own life. Dinner conversation drifted toward money, like it always did these days. Callista, my daughter-in-law, sighed dramatically. "Grocery prices are ridiculous. Ground beef's up again. It's like feeding a family is a full-time job." I chuckled lightly. Oatmeal and canned soup worked just fine for me. That's when it happened. Thorne, still chewing, waved his fork lazily in the air and said, "Well, you're practically living for free here anyway. What are you, our freeloader in residence?" The laughter stopped, cold. Even the clink of silverware faded into silence. A few chuckled nervously, unsure if he meant it as a joke or a jab. I looked at him. He didn't look back. He just kept eating, like nothing had been said, like I was nothing worth noticing. I didn't respond, just nodded. Managed a thin smile, took another bite, though it tasted like sand. Inside, my hands were shaking, not from rage, something worse. Recognition. This wasn't a passing joke. This was a window into the way they saw me now. A weight. A cost. Images flashed, nights I worked overtime at the sawmill, the blisters that tore my palms as I built Thorne's first treehouse, the money scraped together for his college fund, even when we had nothing left for ourselves. And now I was the punchline. Silence is often mistaken for weakness, I reminded myself. But I wasn't weak. I was watching, always watching. I felt a small hand under the table. Ember. She looked at me, eyes wide and unsure. Her fingers squeezed mine gently, as if to say, "I see you." That one gesture meant more than every word spoken tonight. Callista broke the tension. "So, did you all catch the game last night?" Just like that, the room moved on. Weather, football, vacation plans. Thorne. Still no eye contact. Not a single glance. That told me more than anything else could have. He meant it. I finished my meal in silence. No seconds offered. Plans for a summer trip bounced around the table. Someone mentioned Myrtle Beach. "Let's rent a big house. Just the family," they said. "Just the family." I helped clear the dishes. No one stopped me. No one said thank you. I wandered into the living room. The photo wall, once a mosaic of milestones, now barely featured me. Old photos, faded, tucked behind others. None from the past few years. Had I really vanished that quietly? "All right, Dad," Callista said from the hallway. "Drive safe." Ember hugged me hard, her tiny arms wrapping around my waist like she was holding the whole world together. Thorne gave a nod, just a nod. Then the door shut behind me. The drive home was quiet. The kind of quiet that fills your ears with your own thoughts. Freeloader. The word bounced around the cabin like a wasp trapped behind glass. I gripped the wheel. Glanced at the calluses on my hands, the same hands that built that house, paid those bills, cradled my newborn son. They have no idea who they just called a burden, I muttered. I pulled over under the flickering street lamp. Sat there. Let the weight settle. This wasn't the worst of it, no. This was just the beginning. The door clicked shut behind me, and the quiet swallowed everything. I walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and stared blankly at last week's meatloaf. I wasn't hungry. Not really. But routine has a way of pulling you forward, even when your heart wants to stop moving. I heated up a plate anyway, sat down in silence. 42 years. I'd lived in this house longer than any other place, raised my son here, buried my wife from here. But that night, it felt foreign. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort, it isolates. The TV in the living room flickered on, some late baseball game humming in the background. I wasn't watching. My eyes kept drifting toward the fireplace mantel, toward the photo of Malis. She was smiling in that picture, holding a pie in one hand and a mischievous glint in her eye. God, I missed that look. I missed her voice, her grounding presence. I took her old chair, the one she'd sit in at night while doing puzzles, muttering curse words under her breath when she couldn't find a piece. Sitting there now, I swore I could almost hear her. The ache in my chest finally bloomed. They'd called me a freeloader, but it was her absence that hurt the most. Later, I decided to tidy up. Not for any reason, just to stay busy, to stay upright. While dusting the bookshelf, my elbow knocked over an old recipe tin. It clattered to the floor. The lid popped off, and inside, amid the yellowed cards for pecan pie and pot roast, was a folded scrap of paper. I froze. That handwriting, the looping M, the slightly tilted slant to the R's. Malis. I unfolded it with shaking hands. The paper was brittle, nearly crumbling at the edges. But the ink had held strong. If they ever forget what you've done, don't let them convince you it wasn't worth it. You are not a shadow. My breath caught. I sat down hard in her chair, rereading it, again. It was like hearing her voice, clear, firm, steady. She must have written it during Thorne's worst teenage years, back when he'd scream that I was too hard on him, that I didn't understand. But now, it felt like she'd written it for tonight. For this moment. I clutched the note to my chest like armor. I stepped out into the backyard, the scent of tomato vines and damp earth grounding me. The hose creaked as I turned it on, water sputtering over the garden. That was her thing. Tomatoes. She could never resist pulling one straight off the vine, wiping it on her shirt, and biting in. As I sprayed the base of the plants, I heard voices drifting from the neighbor's window. The Coopers. They always left a window cracked open near the porch. "Thorne, he's not well," Callista said. Her voice was clear. Too clear. She was on speaker. "What if he falls? Or forgets something on the stove again?" Maybe it's time. Maybe we just help him into assisted living. Silence. Then Thorne's voice. "I'll look into it. Quietly. Don't tell Ember yet." The hose dropped from my hand. They weren't worried. They were planning to erase me, politely. I didn't storm over, didn't bang on their door. What good would that do? Instead, I came back inside and pulled out a notebook. Sat at the kitchen table, Malis's letter beside me. I started a list, things they wouldn't take, couldn't touch, not without my say. The back porch I built with my brother, the walnut dining table I carved by hand, the cedar wardrobe that still smelled like her perfume. This wasn't junk. It was memory, legacy. I found the deed to the house. My name was still on it. Mine, fully. I flipped to a fresh page and began writing memories. Real ones, not the soft kind. The hard-earned, bone-deep truths. Let's see them rewrite history when it's written in ink. I picked up the phone. "Dale," I said. "Gid?" The voice on the other end rasped. "Man, it's been a while." "Yeah," I replied. "Listen, you still got that lawyer cousin in Akron?" Dale paused. "What's going on?" "I'm not okay," I said, "but I'm getting there." He didn't ask more, just gave me a number. That night I scanned Malis's note, saved it on a USB, printed copies, Filed everything, house deed, insurance, medical records, into a locked drawer. I wasn't going down without a trail. My phone rang. Ember. I stared at the screen. Her photo beamed back at me, gap-toothed and sweet. I let it ring out. Not tonight. I needed the silence more than I needed the comfort. Later, I sat on the back porch, steam rising from the chipped mug in my hand. Melis's favorite. Chamomile tea, just like she liked it. The moon hung low, casting silver shadows over the yard. Freeloader, huh? I muttered. I glanced down at the notebook beside me. On the first page I had written, Gideon Merrick, father. Husband, builder, not dead yet. This wasn't over. Not by a damn long shot. The coffee pot hissed and sputtered, filling the kitchen with the smell of dark roast. I reached for Melis's mug, still sitting on the drying rack where I'd placed it days ago. I never drank from it. It felt wrong, but I couldn't move it either. It had become a silent witness. The morning quiet wasn't peace anymore. It was something sharper, like a warning I couldn't quite decipher. I stepped outside with my cup, the early Ohio air crisp against my skin. The neighbors waved as they picked up their papers, but I gave them nothing more than a forced smile before turning away. I didn't want to talk, not today. I bent down to water the front garden, the hose groaning as water sputtered onto the soil. My eyes caught on the dusty fishing rods leaning in the corner of the garage, remnants of a dream deferred. My hand lingered on one, and I muttered under my breath, "When did I become invisible?" The rods took me back to a plan Melis and I had once clung to like a lifeline. We had saved for 5 years. Every overtime shift, every penny pinched, was for that one road trip, our retirement dream. We mapped it out on sticky notes across the kitchen wall: Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, the Oregon coast. She even bought a small pair of binoculars, said she'd finally spot a bald eagle in the wild. But in 2009 the phone rang. Thorne's voice cracked with panic. Ember was crying in the background. The bank was foreclosing, 3 months behind on the mortgage. They didn't know what to do. I didn't hesitate. I cashed out the trip fund, handed it all over, paid 3 months forward, kept their roof over their heads, kept their little family intact. We never saw Yosemite, never touched Oregon's coast. That summer, I spent my weekends in Thorne's garage fixing a leaky roof instead of staring out at the Grand Canyon. Melis never complained, but her silence on the matter, it stretched on for weeks. Sometimes silence can say more than words. One night she touched my shoulder and whispered, "You always said family comes first." I nodded, but that whisper, it still echoes. Later that week, I stopped by the local diner. Same cracked vinyl booths, same smell of burnt coffee. Clara, an old friend from church, slid into the booth across from me. "You must be proud of Thorne," she said, stirring sugar into her tea. "Ember told me he's the one who saved their house back in '09, a real provider." I froze, the ceramic mug heavy in my hand. "Is that so?" I managed, forcing a polite smile. The coffee tasted bitter, suddenly unbearable. "Always had a good head for timing," Clara went on, completely unaware. "Not many young men would have stepped up like that." I nodded, jaw tightening until my teeth ached. The story had been rewritten. My sacrifice had been erased, not forgotten, but reassigned. By the time Clara waved goodbye, I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. My life's choices, disappearing under someone else's name. Back home, I went straight to the garage, dug through an old file cabinet until my fingers landed on brittle manila folders. I pulled them out, spread them across the workbench. There it was. Copies of the cashier's checks, my name, my signature, the amount that gutted our retirement dream. Next, a card, faded ink on cheap stationery. Ember's handwriting, "You're a lifesaver. We won't forget this." And yet they had. I slid the papers into a new folder. On the tab I wrote in thick black marker, "Inheritance Truths." This wasn't about money. It never had been. It was about respect, about memory, about not being buried alive under someone else's narrative. That evening I picked up the phone again, not Dale this time, his cousin, the lawyer. I booked a consult. My voice was steady, deliberate. I wasn't going to wait for anyone else to dictate my worth. When I hung up, I opened the notebook again, Wrote down one line underlined 3 times. Gratitude is not inherited, it is taught. The phone buzzed. A text from Ember. Dinner again next week, let me know. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a casual invite, like Sunday hadn't happened. I set the phone face down on the table. Let's see how they handle silence, I murmured. Before bed, I walked out to the backyard. The moonlight glowed over Melis's rosebush, petals pale and soft in the night air. I knelt down, planted a new tomato sprout beside it. You always said things grow better when they're loved, I whispered. Let's test that. Back inside, I slid the Inheritance Truths folder into the fireproof box, locked it shut. This time, I said quietly, I'll write the story. The stack of bills on my kitchen table had become a weekly ritual. I paid them on time, always had. As I sifted through envelopes, a date caught my eye. Lily's semester had started nearly 3 months ago. 3 months, and not a word from her. Not a call, not a text, not even a postcard scrawled with "Thanks, Grandpa." I set my teacup down and opened my ledger. The neat columns stared back at me. $8,000, certified mail, tuition support. I'd logged it the way I always did, careful, precise. My signature on the deposit slip was right there. Kids forget, I muttered, flipping through pages. Or maybe she's just busy. But the silence pressed harder the more I thought about it. On my desk lay a letter I had written but never sent. Words of encouragement for finals, reminders to rest and believe in herself. I had folded it, left it beside Melis's photo. My throat tightened. Was I expecting too much? Or was something wrong? A week later, at the farmer's market, I bumped into Clara again, Lily's old piano teacher. She smelled faintly of cinnamon and carried a basket full of peaches. "You must be proud of Lily," she said brightly. "She's so grateful for her parents. Ember told me they really tightened their belts to save enough for tuition. Quite the sacrifice." The words cut clean through me. I forced a polite nod, my face neutral, but inside my stomach knotted. "Tightened their belts?" I muttered as I walked away, heart thudding. I mailed the damn belt. The peaches in her basket blurred in my vision as my mind replayed it. Ember taking credit, Thorn smiling in agreement. My check swallowed into silence. The next morning, I drove to the bank. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I approached the counter. "I need transaction records for a cashier's check I issued in May," I said. My voice didn't waver. Within minutes, the clerk handed me a printout. Cashed within 2 days, at a branch 2 blocks from Thorn's office. My chest tightened. "Can I request the endorsed copy?" I asked. She nodded. When the paper slid across the desk, my eyes froze. The back bore Thorn's signature, clear, undeniable. The check had been made out to the school. Why in God's name had he cashed it himself? I walked out into the parking lot, clutching the papers, the betrayal heavier than the humid air. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed to understand what game was being played. The invitation came the following Sunday. Ember called, her tone bright, insisting, "Lily will be here, Gideon. You should come." I went. Lily hugged me at the door, her eyes warm. "Thanks for always believing in me, Grandpa." She didn't know. I could see it. Her gratitude was genuine but misdirected. At dinner, the table was loud with chatter. Thorn lifted his glass, chuckling. "We're just lucky Ember's budgeting saved the day." College isn't cheap. My eyes locked on his. Ember's gaze dropped instantly, her hands fiddling with her napkin. Lily smiled proudly, praising her parents. My mouth stayed shut, though every muscle in me screamed. I carved my roast in silence, memorizing every detail. That night, back at my desk, I opened a fresh page in my notebook. I wrote a new clause for my lawyer, no distribution without written acknowledgement. Then I started compiling a timeline of every act of support, every dollar, every check, every sacrifice. I wouldn't let them erase me twice. "If they're going to rewrite history," I muttered, "then I'll write the ledger." I opened an account for education savings, not for Lily anymore, for her children someday, directly. I wouldn't give Thorn or Ember the chance to filter the truth again. Above my desk, I taped a photo. Lily as a little girl, sitting in Melis's lap. Both of them laughing, hair tangled by the wind, a reminder of why I'd done it all. My phone buzzed, a text from Ember. "Thanks again for coming. It means a lot." I didn't reply. The house was quiet when the phone rang again. This time it wasn't family. It was Owen. Gid, my old sawdust partner. Haven't heard from you in months, he boomed. You still good at sniffing out inconsistencies? I asked. He chuckled. You finally ready to stop letting things slide? I stared at the copy of the check in my hand, my grip tightening. The ink seemed to mock me. Yeah, I said softly. It's time someone started asking the questions. The diner was almost empty, the kind of place where nobody asked questions and the coffee never ran out. Owen sat across from me, a thick envelope resting on the table between us. His eyes scanned the room once before he slid it over. Pulled everything I could, he said, his voice low. You're not going to like it. I opened the packet and felt my breath slow. Page after page, the same story repeated. College payments logged under Thorne's accounts. Insurance premiums redirected. Repairs on his home, even the roof job I remembered paying for, all filed as if Thorne had footed the bill. Owen tapped the papers. This isn't casual. This is a pattern. Systematic. Someone's been laundering your support into his reputation for at least 5, maybe 7 years. I closed the folder gently, as if rough handling might shatter what was left of me. I didn't argue. I didn't even curse. I just stared at the evidence and thought, so this is how they did it, by erasing me piece by piece. A week later, Lily and I met for lunch at a small cafe near the university. She was bright, energized, full of the optimism only youth could carry. You ever wonder, she said between bites, why things always seem to work out for me? Dad always came through at the last minute. He just made it work somehow. I sipped my coffee, careful not to react. And your mom? I asked, tone casual. She was fine with all that? Lily shrugged. Mom said he's always handled the money. She told me once, that's your father's strength. He takes care of us. The words tightened around my chest like a vice. It wasn't just Thorne's theft. It was Ember's silence. She hadn't merely looked the other way. She had reinforced it, built it into Lily's world view. I smiled faintly, not letting her see the storm behind my eyes. He must be proud, I said softly. She nodded, oblivious. That night I walked through the orchard malus and I had planted years ago. The branches were bare now, autumn stripping them clean. Her words came back to me, spoken long ago while pruning. You cut what doesn't bear fruit, Gid. Otherwise, it drains the whole tree. I stood under the moonlight, notebook in hand, scribbling a list. Debts I'd paid, stories I'd heard twisted, sacrifices buried. When I finished, I tore the page out and burned it in the fire pit. The flames licked at the paper, curling the ink into smoke. No more paying for their version of my life, I whispered. I'll write the truth myself. At the lawyer's office, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I laid the documents on the desk. Adjust the trust, I said firmly. No disbursements without my signature, in person, face to face. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. Expecting a fight? I'm expecting silence to cost me more than speaking ever could, I replied. I added a clause, an education trust directly in Lily's name, bypassing her parents entirely. And then I started recording video logs, not just for legal clarity, but for legacy. If they won't remember me right, I'll remember myself for them. In the weeks that followed, I made my moves quietly. I withdrew from a joint investment Thorne had roped me into years back, sold off shares, closed dormant accounts. Every receipt went straight to my P.O. box, not the house. Ember called one evening, her voice a touch too casual. Everything okay? I noticed a withdrawal notice. I smiled into the phone, masking steel with warmth. Just tidying up before fall. You know me. She hesitated but let it drop. I noted that hesitation. Meanwhile, I began giving, quietly, anonymously. Scholarships through the church, donations to local funds. Real help, without middlemen rewriting my story. The town hall smelled of old wood and fresh varnish. Lily stood on stage, glowing under the lights as she accepted her academic award. I clapped from the back, pride swelling despite everything. Then the announcer's words rang out. And of course, none of this would have been possible without the financial guidance and support of her father, Thorne Merrick, the driving force behind her success. Applause thundered. Thorne smiled. Ember glowing beside him. Lily clapped too, not knowing. I stood still, jaw clenched, the sound of their cheers grinding against me. He rewrote history, I muttered. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Owen. There's more, you're not going to like it. I walked out of the hall, the noise fading behind me. The first Sunday of October carried a crisp bite in the air. The maples down the street had begun turning amber, scattering leaves across the pavement. My phone buzzed late that morning, Ember's number flashing on the screen. "Dinner tonight," she said lightly. "Lily asked if you'd come." After weeks of silence and distance, now an invitation, my instincts stirred. "Lily will be there?" I asked. "Yes," Ember replied quickly. She insisted. I agreed, though hesitation lingered. From my orchard I picked a bottle of apple cider, the kind Malis and I used to share with neighbors every autumn. A tradition, something real, unlike the artificial warmth I sensed in Ember's tone. When I arrived, the house was pristine, floors shining, clutter tucked away. It felt less like a family gathering and more like a stage. I stood at the doorway, cider in hand, and thought, this isn't a dinner, it's a presentation. The meal began with polite chatter, too polite. Lily sat quietly at the end of the table, her eyes darting nervously between her parents. Thorn dominated the conversation, weaving long, embellished stories about family vacations. Ember laughed a little too loudly, nodding at every exaggeration. It was theater, not memory. At one point, Thorn recalled a camping trip, claiming he had started the fire that kept everyone warm. I corrected gently. That was Malis. She always carried matches in her purse. The air shifted. Ember's smile tightened. Dad gets confused sometimes, she said with a laugh that froze the table. My fork paused midair. The words sank like lead. Confused. A single word, dressed as a joke, yet meant to stain. I didn't argue. I just took another bite, letting silence draw its own conclusions. After dessert, Lily excused herself to make tea in the kitchen. The moment the door swung closed, Thorn leaned back in his chair. "Dad," he began smoothly, "we've noticed a few slips lately. Retiree confusion, you know?" Ember followed quickly, her tone sugar-sweet but heavy with implication. "A friend's husband started forgetting names at your age. It can happen suddenly." Her eyes locked on mine. The trap was clear. They were building a narrative. I smiled faintly, though every muscle in me tensed. "Funny," I said evenly. "I remember the truth better than either of you seem to." Ember's face softened for a flicker, shame flickering in her eyes. "We're just worried, that's all," she murmured. I leaned back, folding my hands calmly. Worry looks a lot like rewriting from where I sit. The next moment, I set my own test. Mid-sentence, I paused deliberately, frowning at the table as if I had lost the thought. Thorn pounced immediately. "See? That's exactly what we've been talking about." I waited a beat, then finished the sentence perfectly, stringing together vocabulary so sharp it left no doubt. Their faces fell into silence. I smiled, polite as ever. "If you're building a case, you should at least let the man know he's on trial." Ember looked down, her fingers twitching at the hem of her blouse. Thorn clenched his jaw, his victory snatched away in a single turn. I excused myself, claiming I had forgotten something in the car. Outside, the cool air filled my lungs, my heart pounding with restrained fury. Through the window I saw them, Thorn looking smug again, Ember tense, her smile cracked. In the kitchen doorway, Lily stood frozen, uncertainty in her face. I didn't go back inside. Instead, I set the bottle of cider on the porch with a note tucked under the ribbon. May it help you remember what's real. Then I walked to my car and drove away. That night, as I sat in my study, the phone rang. An unfamiliar number. "Mr. Merrick," a voice said. Calm, deliberate. "You don't know me, but you need to see something. About your family." I stiffened, gripping the receiver tighter. "Who is this?" The voice lowered. "I think they're trying to have you declared mentally unfit for your estate." My chest tightened, anger flooding through me. "Who are you?" The line went dead. The house was silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I sat at my desk, staring at the phone that had just gone dead. My hands didn't shake. I was past that stage of life. But the words clung to me like smoke. They're trying to have you declared mentally unfit. I scribbled notes furiously into what I now called my ledger of truth. The dinner date, Ember's comment about confusion, Thorne's smug grin, and now this anonymous voice. I copied the number down, tried a reverse search online. Nothing. No name, no record. Paranoia crept at the edges, but I wasn't afraid. I'd lived too long, seen too much. Fear was for men who had something left to lose. What I felt was sharper, suspicion, focus. They were moving pieces on the board. I needed to map the game. By dawn, the orchard mist lay heavy, and I thought back to Ember's offhand stories years ago about Charleston, about a college friend she escaped from. I dug into that memory like a miner clawing for ore. Through an old VFW contact, a man who knew how to dig discreetly, I put in a request. By mid-morning, I had a name, Jack Merton. The report was ugly. A former fiancé of Ember's, briefly institutionalized after accusations of instability, but within months, doctors cleared him. The real kicker? Ember's family had quietly paid off the professionals, smoothing over reputational cracks for their daughter. I leaned back in my chair, eyes narrowing. "She's done this before," I whispered to the empty room. The phone rang again that afternoon. The same voice, low, roughened with age. "Mr. Merrick, we should meet." I drove to a coffee shop 2 towns over, the kind of place where the vinyl seats cracked and the pie sat under a cloudy glass dome. At a corner booth sat Jack Merton, mid-60s, unshaven, eyes still bright under a weary frame. He didn't waste time. "You're Gideon. I was Ember's mistake before she married your son." His story spilled out in measured tones, how Ember had painted him as abusive, manipulative, dangerous, until his world crumbled. When I tried to defend myself, she pulled her family in, paid the doctors, built a narrative I couldn't fight. He slid a worn manila envelope across the table. Inside, hospital records, old letters, and a grainy audio recording. "You don't have to believe me," he said, voice steady. "Just look at the pattern." That night, I sat alone with headphones playing the recording. Ember's voice, unmistakable, whispering to her mother. "Sometimes you need to make people believe things, to protect your future." I paused the tape, bile rising in my throat. The chill in her tone wasn't desperation, it was calculation. The realization burned through me. Thorne wasn't the mastermind. He was either a pawn, or worse, a willing accomplice. I filed the evidence into the fireproof box, my ledger of truth swelling with weight. This was no longer about meals gone cold or forgotten thank yous. This was war over memory, legacy, and power. The next morning, I walked my orchard rows, crisp leaves crunching underfoot. With each step, I thought of Malis, her warnings about emotional debts, her insistence that we prepare for storms. I called an old friend from my sawmill days, now a lawyer specializing in elder law. "Tell me about living trusts," I said. "Tell me how one proves mental capacity. Airtight, no loopholes." By noon, I had a plan forming. New trusts, direct lines of inheritance, video logs. "You can't gaslight a man holding the receipts," I muttered, scribbling in my journal. At the bottom of the page I wrote, "If they're playing chess, I'll be the board." Evening fell, and with it, a knock on my door. Ember stood there, a pie in her hands, her smile rehearsed. "I thought we should talk," she said softly. "Just the two of us." My pulse steadied, every instinct sharp. Under a coaster on the coffee table, my recorder was already running. I smiled, opening the door. "Of course," I said smoothly. "I've been expecting you." The knock came soft but deliberate, the kind that already knew the answer. I opened the door, and there she stood, Ember, with a pie balanced in her hands and a smile rehearsed enough to belong on a theater stage. "You've been so quiet lately," she said sweetly. "We were worried." I noted the details. She hadn't parked in front, likely tucked her car down the street, away from curious neighbors, a calculated entrance. My instincts hummed. "Come in," I said casually, stepping aside. The kitchen lights cast a warm glow, but the air between us was chilled steel. She set the pie down on the counter, commenting on how nice the place smelled, how long it had been. I poured coffee, placing hers in front of her with steady hands. Beneath the coaster on the table, the recorder blinked silently. I'd rehearsed this routine already. Tonight wasn't dinner. Tonight was evidence. At first, she spoke in sugar-coated half-truths. Things have been tense lately. Thorne's been under a lot of pressure. You've always been a little hard to talk to. Each word pressed lightly at my pride, a scalpel dressed in velvet. I listened, only nodding, sipping coffee, offering nothing. Finally, I asked, "Why are you really here tonight, Ember?" Her smile tightened, faltered. She leaned forward, hands clasped like a prayer, though her eyes carried no reverence. "I know you've been thinking about changes, to the will, to the house, to everything, and that's your right. But you need to think about what's fair, about Thorne's future." I raised an eyebrow. Funny how the word legacy always sounds like money when you say it. She didn't laugh. The kitchen clock ticked louder in the silence between us. I decided to spring the trap. "If you were me," I asked evenly, "what would you do with the estate?" She hesitated, then began, "I'd split it evenly. It's the only way to keep peace, to keep things fair. We just don't want to fight you on this. We—" I leaned back, repeating softly, "We?" Her eyes flickered, too quick, too revealing. The mask slipped at the edges. I reached under my coffee cup and lifted the coaster, the recorder blinking red in my palm. "I hope you've meant every word," I said quietly. The silence cracked like glass, Ember's composure shattered, replaced by sharp edges. "Are you recording me?" she hissed. "Just a habit I picked up," I replied, after people I trusted started calling me senile. Her hand shot toward the device, but I pulled it back with the reflexes of a man who'd lifted lumber most of his life. "You think you're clever," she spat, her voice stripped of sweetness now. "This isn't over." "It never started with honesty," I told her. "That's the problem." She stood abruptly, nearly knocking the chair back, and stormed out. The screen door slapped shut behind her. The pie sat untouched on the counter, a cheap peace offering turned into a symbol of betrayal. I didn't look at it again. I pressed stop on the recorder and slid it into my folder, the one I now kept in a fireproof lockbox. It was close to midnight when the message came. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. The text read, "Recordings can disappear, houses can burn, be careful, old man." I stared at it, expressionless. Then I stood, walked to the safe, and placed a USB copy of the recording inside. The lock clicked shut. "They want war?" I muttered to the empty cabin, voice steady. "They'll get it." The lawyer's office was cold, sterile, the kind of place where words outlived people. I sat across from Carla Monroe, the only person I still trusted with a pen that could cut deeper than any blade. "You're sure about this?" she asked, glasses low on her nose, eyes sharp as the day she used to check lumber inventories back at the sawmill. I nodded, gaze fixed on the stack of papers in front of me. "More sure than I've been about anything in years." She hesitated, tapping the desk. "This will cause a war." I thought of Thorne's silence, Ember's manipulation, Lily's misplaced gratitude. A war had already begun. This was me choosing the battleground. "When angry, count 4. When very angry, swear," I quoted Twain. "But never write a will in that state. This isn't anger, Carla. It's protection." And with that, I signed, page after page, each stroke of ink a quiet severing. Carla's voice broke the silence as she read aloud from the new structure. "The cabin, donated to the Wildlife Conservation Trust." I saw Melis's face in my mind, smiling at the thought of elk grazing near the porch we built. The pickup and tools, left to Roy Halstead. I pictured Roy, all grit and sawdust, the boy I trained who became a man I respected. "A college trust for Clara Vance, your brother's granddaughter?" "She's got fire," I said simply. "Her family's a mess, but she deserves a chance." And the orchard proceeds, diverted to the veteran's kitchen. I met Carla's eyes. Men who gave more than they ever got. "Let the apples feed them." She paused, then asked, "And nothing for Thorne or Ember?" "Decades of chances," I said flatly. They did the math themselves. Back at the cabin, I placed my copy of the will into the fireproof box. Steel and flame-proof paper. Safe from fire, though not from betrayal. A letter slid under the door that evening. Thorne's handwriting, or so it seemed. Apologies lined in ink but empty in soul. Phrases like "we care" and misunderstandings leapt off the page, hollow and rehearsed. Ember's touch, no doubt. I fed the letter to the fireplace, watching the flames curl it into ash. I felt nothing, just a confirmation of what I already knew. I remembered Thorne telling me once, "Dad, you don't trust anyone. That's your problem." My answer then is the same now. I trust who earns it, and I never forget who doesn't. That afternoon, a knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. Roy stood there, boots muddy, hands calloused, eyes honest. "I heard from Carla," he said, shifting awkwardly. "You sure about leaving me that truck? Ain't this something for your boy?" I let out a dry laugh. My boy hasn't been my son in a long time. Roy didn't argue. He never did. "Well, if you'll have me, I'll help you with the orchard before frost sets in, like old times." "Like old times," I repeated, the words lighter than I expected. We shared coffee on the porch. No need for long speeches. Loyalty doesn't need many words. It just shows up when asked. That night, I found an envelope in my mailbox. Childlike handwriting scrawled my name, Mr. Gideon. Inside was a letter from Clara, the girl who barely knew me, yet somehow knew more than my own blood. She thanked me for the trust fund, said it gave her hope. At the bottom was a drawing, a cabin, an old man with a kind face, and the word "Grandpa," written in careful, uneven letters. My throat tightened. I folded the paper gently, slid it into the worn pages of my Bible. "Maybe," I whispered to the night, "some branches are worth grafting." The pounding on my door at dawn was sharp enough to rattle the frame. I opened it to find Thorne, Ember, and a stranger in a cheap suit standing on my porch. Thorne's jaw was clenched. Ember wore her Sunday school smile, and the stranger already had a folder in hand. "This isn't a family visit," I said, eyeing the papers. "That's a summons." The attorney cleared his throat, slick voice rehearsed. "Mr. Merrick, your children are concerned about your ability to manage your estate. We're contesting the legality of your will." Ember put on her syrupy tone, tilting her head like I was some senile old fool. "We just want what's fair, Dad. We don't want you taken advantage of." I let out a laugh so bitter it startled even me. "The only thing declining here," I said, "is your integrity." Then I slammed the door in their faces. I drove into town, the autumn sun rising like a slow-burning ember behind me. Carla Munro was waiting at her office, file folders stacked neatly, coffee steaming. "They came with papers," I said, tossing the crumpled summons on her desk. She skimmed it, snorted. "Sloppy work. Ember's fingerprints are all over this. Half emotion, no law." I leaned forward. "They want to play chess? I'll play the endgame." Carla adjusted her glasses, eyes narrowing with steel. "We'll file a restraining order, prepare affidavits, and bring in your doctor's report. But Gideon, you need to be ready for them to drag your name through the mud." I exhaled slow, steady. They already called me a burden. I've been ready. The courthouse was cold, wood-paneled, heavy with silence. The judge peered down at me like an old crow eyeing roadkill. "Mr. Merrick," he asked, "do you understand these proceedings?" "Perfectly," I replied, my voice carried, firm. "I understand my children want my house more than they want my company." Ember dabbed fake tears with a tissue, speaking sweetly to the bench. "We're only worried about Dad's confusion. He forgets things. He gets mixed up." Thorne shifted uncomfortably, his eyes never meeting mine. Carla stood. "Your Honor, my client isn't confused. He's prepared, and he's been documenting everything." She laid out texts, financial ledgers, and medical clearance, but then came the hammer. Carla introduced a small digital recorder. "Exhibit B," she said. A recording of Ember's voice filled the courtroom. "Sometimes you need to make people believe things to protect your future." The silence after was heavier than stone. The judge's gavel struck once. "Full capacity confirmed. Petition denied. And I suggest you both tread carefully." Back at the cabin, I replaced the front gate lock with one that clanged loud and final. At the edge of my land, I posted a framed notice. Private property. No trespassing. Family included. Roy dropped by, his hands stained with oil, boots caked in mud. Heard about the courthouse? You holding up? Better than they are, I said, handing him a mug of cider. He offered to help mend the old shed before winter. I nodded. Life went on, and the orchard still needed tending. That night I spoke briefly with Clara on the phone. Her laugh was clear, unburdened. It reminded me that sometimes you have to prune a tree to give new branches room to grow. I was settling in when I heard the scrape under the door. A single envelope slid across the floorboards. No signature, but the handwriting was embers. This isn't over. Blood is thicker than your pride. I pinned the note to the barn wall with a hunting knife. You're right, I muttered. It's not over. Not yet. The storm rolled in without mercy. Thunder cracked like gunfire across the valley, and rain battered the tin roof of my cabin as if trying to punch its way inside. I had a fire burning, a flashlight set on the table, and Melis's quilt wrapped over my knees. Still, the air felt heavier than the storm outside, like something else was coming. Then came the knock. Sharp, hesitant, unfamiliar. I opened the door and found Thorn drenched through, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes hollow. I figured you wouldn't answer if I called, he muttered. I didn't say a word, just stepped aside and let him in. The storm outside howled. The storm between us was louder. We sat across from each other in the glow of the fire. The silence stretched so long you could almost hear it crack. Finally, he smirked faintly. Still smells like cedar and stubbornness in here, he said. I let a dry chuckle escape. Some things don't change. He shifted, restless. I'm not here because of Ember. I came alone. You left alone, I corrected, or you just arrived alone. There's a difference. His jaw tightened. He looked down at his wet boots. She made it easy to blame you. I needed someone to blame. I leaned back, folded my arms, and kept quiet. For once, I wanted to hear the full truth without cutting him off. His voice cracked as he finally admitted, I always felt I was never enough for you. The fire snapped, filling the silence. Thorn's words spilled out in broken waves. You loved the land, the orchard, the damn sawmill. I felt like all of that came first. You built a legacy, but forgot to make us feel part of it. I let the accusation hang, then answered low, steady. I worked myself raw to give you more than I had. I thought letting you grow on your own was love, not distance. He shook his head. It felt like absence. I swallowed hard. Then I failed you in a way I never intended. From the drawer beside the fireplace, I pulled out a torn letter, yellowed with years. I wrote this after your graduation. Couldn't bring myself to send it. Too proud, I guess. Thorn's hands trembled as he read. My words, written decades ago, told him what I never said out loud, that I was proud of him, even in his failures, that his strength was different than mine, but no less real. When he finished, his lips pressed tight, his eyes shone like wet glass. He broke the silence with a whisper. She used that against me. Ember. I tilted my head. She told me you thought I was weak, that you said it behind my back. I believed her, because it's what I always feared. She knew how to dig under my skin. The storm outside rattled the windows, wind screaming like it was listening in. I overheard her once, Thorn admitted. She never thought you were unwell. She just wanted the assets. She said I was the key because I resented you. I didn't raise my voice, didn't curse. I just nodded. The truth is heavy. Only the strong carry it. His tears came quietly, shoulders trembling. I reached across the table, placed my rough hand on his shoulder. You're still my boy. That never changed. For the first time in years we started talking, not as adversaries, but as blood. The storm seemed to ease just slightly. We cleared plates, stacked them by the sink. the kind of simple chore that almost felt like peace. Then the headlights cut across the cabin window. Thorn froze. I stood, my jaw tightening. "That'll be her," I said. Through the rain-streaked glass, Ember emerged from her car, but she wasn't alone. Another shadow stepped out beside her, taller, broader. I whispered under my breath, steady and cold. "Now the real game begins." The invitation was short, polite, and formal. Sunday dinner. My place. All know a Pole. It spread through the family like wildfire. Callista whispered to her sister, who whispered to her husband. The grandchildren looked confused. Ember scoffed, but couldn't hide her interest. "This smells like a trap," she told Thorn. He only shook his head, eyes dark. Don't underestimate him anymore. The weather that Sunday was calm, almost unnaturally so. Blue skies stretched clean across the Ohio suburbs, as if the storm of the last weeks had exhausted eye. When they arrived, the old place had never looked sharper. The table was set the way Malis used to arrange it, polished wood gleaming, linens folded crisp, the smell of roast chicken and cornbread wafting through the rooms. For a moment I saw flickers of nostalgia on their faces. I welcomed them with a steady smile. Not warmth, not anger, just something firmer. My grip lingered long enough on Thorn's handshake that he flinched, knowing this wasn't a social call. Ember kissed the air near my cheek, her lipstick smile tight as a vice. At each place setting, an envelope rested neatly beside the plate. Each bore a name written in my handwriting. Nobody dared to touch them yet. Dinner was quiet. Forks clinked, but conversation died before it began. Ember tried her syrupy voice, praising the meal, reminiscing about the good old days. I didn't engage. I served the food, passed the bread, and ignored her like smoke passing by. After the last plate was cleared, I lifted my glass. Water, not wine. I've said little these last months. Tonight, I'll say what needs saying. Then, I'm finished. Their eyes lifted, wary. I began calmly, my voice low but carrying. I built this family with calloused hands, paid debts that weren't mine, gave up dreams you'll never know, and for all that, I was repaid with whispers of freeloader, of senility, of being a burden. Ember shifted uncomfortably, but I didn't pause. But tonight, I closed the ledger. I've given away everything. Again, just not to any of you. Confusion broke across their faces. Ember froze, lips parting. I gestured to the envelopes. "Open them." Paper tore. The room filled with the sound of rustling as they read. Notarized letters. Legal documents. The truth they never expected. The cabin, the orchard, the land. None of it was ever yours to scheme over, I said, my voice steady. Thorn blinked, staring at the paper in disbelief. "But the proxy transfer," I smiled faintly. "Rescinded, quietly, 5 years ago." Ember's face drained of color. "The property, the house, the orchard, they belong now to a veterans housing nonprofit, protected by law, irrevocable." Gasps rippled through the room. My grandchildren looked from one face to another, sensing history shifting in front of them. "You plotted behind my back for years," I said. "I simply learned to plot better." Ember snapped, her mask shattering. "You can't do this. This is our legacy." I reached into my vest pocket and pressed a small device. The recorder clicked and Ember's own voice filled the room, her laughter, mocking Thorn, confessing manipulation, bragging about painting me as unstable. The color in Thorn's face drained as he listened, horror replacing denial. Lily's eyes brimmed with tears. Callista looked away, shame flooding her cheeks. "You built a throne on deceit," I told Ember. "Don't act surprised when it crumbles." Ember tried to lunge for the recorder, but Thorn caught her arm. His voice, finally steady, cut the silence. "Enough. You should leave." The children stared, wide-eyed. Nobody defended her. For once her kingdom had no subjects. I didn't gloat, didn't raise my voice. I only exhaled, as if setting down the heaviest load I'd ever carried. Later, when the house had emptied and quiet returned, I sat on the porch with a hot mug of coffee. The air was cool, the stars bright over the orchard. Thorn joined me, settling into the old rocking chair without a word. For once, silence wasn't distance. It was peace. Funny thing about roots, I said at last. If you stop poisoning them, they just might grow back. He nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. I glanced at the framed photo of Malus on the porch table, whispered softly, I kept my promise. And that was the last Sunday I ever cooked for anyone, but the first I truly enjoyed. A father's quiet dignity hides a storm of betrayal in this powerful family drama story. What begins as a simple Sunday dinner turns into a heartbreaking moment no parent should endure. His son's cruel words cut deep, but silence was only the beginning. This emotional tale explores loyalty, sacrifice, and the painful reality of being forgotten by those you love most. Stay tuned as the truth unravels in ways no one could predict, because sometimes silence speaks louder than anger.